All right, well, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for the RIEEE Fall Webinar Series. We are really thrilled to have a great lineup of speakers for you today. And as always, want to reiterate that this series is intended to be the beginning of conversations and actions. So just be listening out for our different speakers and ways that they may invite you to think about your future work or future collaborations or future actions. And we will feedback as well throughout. The way that we want to move ahead with this is I'd like to give you an introduction to all three of our speakers. As you know, that the unifying theme this month is climate science and conservation in mountainous environments. There's a lot there. There's a lot of great expertise among Appalachian State and our great collaborators beyond Appalachian State. And so we have some of that represented here today. I will go ahead and introduce our speakers to give a little bit of context, and then I'm going to pass it to Grace Plummer, who has done all of the work to coordinate and make this possible, so she can tell you a couple of administrative details too. So that we sort of front load this with understanding who you're going to be hearing from, I want to give a chance to introduce our speakers. So Dr. Baker Perry, who is in Geography and Planning Department and is also our inaugural RIEEE Senior Scholar with the Institute, we're happy to say, is joining us to give the first talk, and his research examines alpine precipitation, snow and ice, glacier climate interactions, and climate change in the Himalayas, the Andes, and the Appalachians. So, of course, you can't fit somebody in a sentence. So that's a piece that's going to be relevant for today. After that, we're really very happy to be joined by Baker's colleague, Ruth Marie Pilko Warkaya, and please correct me whenever you need to on these things. But a native of Cusco, Ruth Marie is a National Geographic emerging explorer, and she leads the Andean Bear Reforestation Project at the Amazon Conservation Association. So we are thrilled that she is willing to join us today and give her perspective and experience as well. Her team is studying how the Andean bear is critical to its habitat. And now that that habitat is affected by climate change, she's affecting that as well with Dr. Perry, or studying that and hopefully affecting that for the better with Dr. Perry. And then finally, we are joined by Dr. Matt Estep from the biology department. And he is an associate professor here at Appalachian, where he specializes in evolutionary genetics and genomics. His lab focuses on documenting the biodiversity present in the Amphibolite Mountains here in Watauga and Ashe counties, and sharing that demographic and genetic data to inform land management plans that are highly relevant and currently in play. So there's opportunities for this to be a very high impact. And he wants to specifically inform land management plans in ways that preserve this critical natural heritage. So I think we'll gain some appreciation about what's at stake from him too. And then we've designed it so that there's some time for discussion as well. So with that, I'm going to pass it to Grace Plummer, who, as I mentioned, is our coordinator for this program. And she may have a couple of announcements for you as well before our speakers start.
Thank you, Christine, and for jumping in, fighting the homecoming traffic today so quickly. So we are record these webinars and post them to our YouTube channel, and we've seen viewership there kind of grow over the series. We've been about 2.5 years now. So we will post it there usually within a week or so, depends on when I can get to the processing and upload it. We have one more session this fall in the fall series, and it will focus, that's on Friday, December 2nd at the same time of day, and it will focus on technologies and practices for sustainable food production, another area of research strength here at Appalachian. Just a reminder too, if you are not already subscribed to our RIEEE Google group, you can hear from us directly, and Christine just dropped a couple of links in the chat to connect on the Google group or our YouTube channel. And this is something that we could serve as sort of a kickoff to further conversation. So we have a little form today for those that are attending live, just to help us follow up more effectively. There's just a few quick questions there that will gauge interest in follow-on conversations, discussions, or events. So without further ado, we will jump in with Dr. Perry first, followed by Ruth Mary, and then Matt. And I'll go ahead and turn it over to you, Baker. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Grace, and thank you everybody for being here on a Friday afternoon. The topic of my presentation is high elevation weather stations, rationale, challenges, and new insights. And I want to start from a young age. This was my third grade classroom in Mountainous, Bolivia. And I know you can't guess who I am in this, but this was the environment that I lived in as a child for some of my childhood. And I came to experience and recognize the importance of these high elevation water towers, the snow and ice that's stored up high and sustains large cities such as La Paz and El Alto in Bolivia and many other cities around the world. And what we know is that as this mountain ice disappears as a result of warming and climate change, that the water vulnerability and just the supply of fresh water in general in mountain areas and those downstream from mountain areas is a major concern. And this has been a huge topic for National Geographic and many other funding agencies and governments around the world. The problem that we have realized is that we have so few observations, meteorological observations from the highest elevations of the planet. And here's a graphic, this is from data from 2019 that shows that between 5,000 and 6,000 meters, this is between about 16,000 and 19,500 feet, there are only 19 weather stations. And above 6,000 meters, above about 19,600 feet, there was only one station in 2019. So there's this huge data void up there. Satellites can tell us some things, but not everything that's important in what's happening up there from a meteorological perspective. So this was kind of the context within which that I began some of my work more locally and regionally in the Appalachians. We worked with students and faculty from UNC Asheville and NC State to establish a pretty good base observatory in my backyard on Pogie Mountain. This continues to operate. And from there, I began working in the Peruvian Andes. And this is the backyard of Don Pedro Godfredo, one of the highest permanent inhabitants in the world, 16,568 feet, where we installed a station in 2012. We also went to the nearby El Soyonanta ice cap and installed a station just near the summit of it, but only operated it for 2.5 years due to avalanches, which we triggered one in this photo right here, and also growing crevasse hazards. And so we eventually took this station down and moved it and expanded it to the nearby Calcaya ice cap with a comprehensive precipitation station. Still is the highest precipitation station in the world. But the logistical challenges of working up at these environments are really pretty substantial, which I'll come back to in a minute. Now, staying in the Andes, I want to take you to the Tupungato volcano, which was a project that I co-led with National Geographic in 2021. And what's really clear from Tupungato is just how close the 6 million or so inhabitants of Santiago are to these water towers. And at the end of the dry season, about 70% of the water coming into the Maipo River, which is one of the primary water sources for Santiago, is directly from the snow and the ice that's melting. So we worked with Chilean colleagues to install 2 stations on Tupungatito volcano, and then the big sound effect was important there. So the challenges, of course, from doing some of this work are substantial. And then we went up to near the summit of Tupungato volcano, installed, which at the time was the highest station in the Americas, in early February last year. Now, a few results just from Tupungato, and then we'll go to Everest, is that really impressive just lapse rates, changes in temperature according to elevation. It's this pretty arid to semi-arid environment. And so we have lapse rates that approach the dry adiabatic rate throughout the year on the lower elevations of the mountain. And so that's a pretty important finding. And also the intensity of the solar radiation at the summit there is equal to the solar constant at times. And this is a common theme that I'll come back to in just a minute. And what that means practically, when there's not snow on the ground, the surface skin temperatures of bare ground at Tupungato are on the order of 30 degrees Celsius higher than the 2-meter air temperatures that we're measuring. Next, I want to just take you to the highest elevations in the Himalayas. This is to Mount Everest. This is a view coming into base camp, where I co-led the meteorology team on the 2019 National Geographic and Rolex Perpetual Planet Expedition. And as part of this expedition, and to really help fill this void of data at the highest elevations here in the Himalayas, we installed a network of weather stations, Fort Say, Sherpa community at base camp, then up at Camp 2, up at the South Col, and then finally at the balcony at 27,657 feet. And this was some video from the installation on the lower Khumbu Glacier, where we actually had time and the weather was fairly favorable to do a fairly conventional installation. And we operated this station for a month before moving it off the glacier. And then we had to go up through the Khumbu icefall, which again, some of the challenges, logistical, physical challenges of working in these environments are pretty substantial. And of course, we do most of this climb in the night. And then we eventually arrive into Camp 2 and build this weather station at 21,000 feet, and then work our way up to the South Col, where we installed a weather station at 25,908 feet. And then eventually, after we completed that installation, later that night, climbed up to the balcony where we installed at the time was the highest weather station in the world at 27,657 feet. And so, you know, did I mention the challenges of working in some of these environments? Well, clearly, one of the challenges up here is just the incredibly thin air and lack of oxygen. Even with supplemental oxygen that we were breathing, our brains don't work quite as well. So this was a real success to get data from some of these locations. And over the past 3 years, we've continued to work with our Sherpa team to operate and maintain these stations. And we were able to send them back, 2 members of our core Sherpa team back in 2021 to do some maintenance. And what they found was, the wind sensors had been totally destroyed up here. This is what an intact one looks like. And then you can see that both of these were heavily damaged, but remarkably, the rest of the station was still working. This is at the South Col. So this was a huge success story. The balcony station, meanwhile, had not fared so well, and we found it on its side. And we began to make plans to come back. So this year we were back on the mountain. We replaced the balcony station with one a bit higher and with improved wind sensors, and we're hopeful that these stations will continue to operate. And then just to hit some highlights of what we've learned so far from not only the weather stations, but our work on Everest. Number one, there are big changes taking place. This is results from reanalysis data showing increases in heavy precipitation, freezing level heights, and specific humidity across the Khumbu region since the early 1980s. We've also been able to track the seasonal dependence in moisture source regions and how important the Bay of Bengal is in providing that critical moisture for the snow that falls up high during the monsoon months of June, July, August, and September. And as I touched on with Tupungato, I mean, the incoming solar radiation above base camp is just exceptionally intense. I mean, there are days in periods during the monsoon where the maximum insolation values are well above that solar constant that is the gray dashed line, multiple reflectances coming in. So the amount of energy coming in is just incredibly intense. And so our group, led by Mario Pataki and Paul Majewski, published a piece in Climate and Atmospheric Science earlier this year, trying to reconcile and explain how the top of the ice core that was recovered from the South Col could have lost 2,000 years of ice. The top of the core was dated at 2,000 years old. And so we put forward a hypothesis that the ice had been lost recently over the past 30 to 40 years based on available data we have. And there's a fascinating discussion playing out right now in the open peer review journal, The Cryosphere, prompted by, incidentally, our French colleagues that I've had some collaboration with, and certainly Tom Matthews, my colleague, has as well, showing that Everest South Col Glacier did not thin during the last 3 decades, using some satellite-derived digital elevation models compared with the National Geographic aerial photos from the Washburn map. And so if you're interested to see how science works with different data sets, this is an incredible example, and all the referee comments are on there, and responses to those are on there. And so this is playing out right now. And the review is open until November the 3rd. Then lastly, just this summer in July, we were on Nevado Asongate in Peru, and Ruth was part of this expedition. And we climbed to just below the summit of Asongate and worked up on the summit plateau, where our team dug a snow pit. Ruth was involved with that. These are her photos right here, to take samples for microplastics and isotopes, and also snow water equivalent. And then we also installed a weather station that is similarly showing just incredibly high values of incoming solar radiation. That's something that we're already beginning to prepare a manuscript on. So with that, I'm going to stop and turn things over to Ruth Mary, but just, I guess make a final call for more observations up high, especially in the upper Indus Valley, in the most vulnerable water tower in the world here in Pakistan. So thank you, and look forward to continuing the discussions. And Ruth, I think you can take it away now.
And while we're transitioning, we could pause for a quick question for Baker, if you all would like, if there are any. We do have time at the end of the hour. We'll hold on after we stop recording. We'll hold on for some discussion. So if you can hold your question until then, great. But if anyone has a burning one for Baker now, we could take one.
Okay. Thank you, Baker, for the invitation. Thank you, everybody. It's a pleasure for me to talk to you now about a project here in the southeast of Peru about a very iconic species, the Andean bear, and how we are working on the regeneration and restoration of the cloud forest. So just to tell you where we are working, so we are located in the southeast of Peru at the entrance of Mountainous National Park. You see the star, we are located almost in the door of the Mountainous National Park in a place called Huayquecha Biological Station. And why we choose this place? This place from the Coxnipata Valley to Marcapata is one of the steepest and rainiest place on the gradients. So that's make a very special place to study the effect of climate change, especially if we want to know how the animals are going to move. What's the best place that's this, no? Like it's very steep, like in 100 meters, you're in a different complete forest type. So this, the photo in the background is the station, Huayquecha. So we are about 2,900 meters above sea level. But why we are studying here and why the cloud forest? The cloud forest is under threat from burning from above, like due to agriculture, cattle. In the lower part, we also have deforestation, and also the flora is shifting up as an effect from climate change. So at the end, we have the cloud forest as the sandwich, no? Having the burning and deforestation from below, and threaten this special environment, as is a very special environment that plays an important role in the hydrology of the Amazon basin. So on this ecosystem, we have a very special animal, that's the Andean bear. That is the main habitat for these animals. The Andean bear is the only bear in South America that is being distributed from Venezuela through Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, Bolivia, and to the north of Argentina. According to the IUCN, it's a vulnerable species. And there is just few animals left in the world, about 8,000 mature individuals across the whole habitat. But why the Andean bears? Like these are almost the only animals that use almost the entire highland to the lowlands. Like they distribute from 4,000 up to 500. So they have the entire gradient. And they are the only animals that move freely from the cloud forest upper to the grassland. And it's in these movements, they are dispersing many species of seeds, according to some research, above 120 different species of trees. But also they are very good tree climbers. And as they climb to the trees to reach fruit, they break the branches and thus generate gaps. And this gap, of course, help on the natural regeneration of the forest. But those animals are threatened mainly from habitat destruction and some human conflicts. So what we want to find out about Andean bears on this environment, first we want to know about their diet, where are they and how they move seasonally, how many are there, how could these movements and diet patterns are going to be affected by climate change. And to address many of this work, we are also working on the conflict issues to the restoration of degraded habitat. So here you can just see my map, this Huayquecha, and the red dot, our camera translocation and the transect that we are using across the gradient. So how we are doing it, we are a very diverse group that's constituted by students from local and national university from Peru, but also we have volunteers from different parts of the world, international researchers. A key for us is to work in hand by the local communities, in this case, local Andean communities that are part of our research. So in order to know about the movements, we are setting camera traps across the whole gradients from 3,050 to 550 meters. We are setting camera traps every 50 meters of elevation. So in order to know where these bears are, how the bears are using the different habitats. So here I have some videos. So the good thing about Andean bears is that they have a facial marking, and thus allow us to identify individuals, and we can do recapture analysis. No? Next, so in the past we were using videos, but it was very hard work because we have to go through each video, and some of them has about 2,000, 3,000 videos for just some few months. So now we are using this platform called Wildlife Insight, where we can upload all our photos from the cameras, and through the artificial intelligence, we can identify a species, no? And of course, the advantage of that is anybody from any part of the world can contribute to this, like through the identification of the different species. So to the moment, we have identified about 20 different bear individuals across our study sites. And as I said, no, the good thing is the facial marking that allow us to identify the bear individuals. But also with the camera trap, we kind of know how the bears are using the different habitats, but in order to know more in detail, no, how actually the bears are moving across the gradients, we started with the movement ecology. And for that, we have we're in the process of capturing bears in order to place satellite collars so we can know like how is the life of the Andean bear, but also in collaboration with Nat Geo Labs, we are also placing some critter cams so we kind of know from the perspective of the bear, know how is their daily life. So here I'm going to play a video. To play. Oh, well, it doesn't want to play, but at the end I can play. It just show how was the process of capture and also some footages from the critter cams. So diet is the same as poop. So you were wondering how we're studying the diet of the Andean bears. As the environment here is very rough, it's very difficult to see bears like in the wild. They're very timid and they're hiding. So the best way to study the diet is to try the scat, the feces, no? And for that, of course, we are also working with a dog that we rescue and we're training her, Ukuku, to find the bear feces, no? And the idea is to study it through traditional methodology using the stereoscope and going through each species and see which seeds and plants the birds has been eating. But also we're going to implement with DNA metabarcoding. For that, we are collaborating with the University of Utah, who are going to help us to metabarcoding all these scat. No? But also something what we're going to test is the environmental DNA as is a fast way to know, no, like the presence absence of bears on the area. For that, we're using the saliva that the bears left on the bromelias. So in the photo you will see is a plant bromelia that's from the pineapple family, and that's the one of the main sources for the bears. So bears are mainly vegetarians. 90% are vegetarians. So in United States with the brown bears, what the research did is to swab the saliva from the carcasses left on the salmons, and they were able to identify sex and individuals. So now we're going to test if that can work here by using the bromelias. Another part is related to forest regeneration. As I mentioned, we work with 2 local communities, Andean communities. One of the main effects from climate change so far that's been felt by the communities here is the shortage of water. So in the past, communities used to always ask to reforest the area by using non-native species like the eucalyptus or the pine. But now they realize that they need native species. So we are reforesting areas, especially the headwaters, with native species. But also something we did is because as we are studying now the diet of the bears, we have identified the most important plant species on their diet. So we are implementing also the nurseries with these plants. So we are doing experiments of propagation of these species that are the main food for the bears, and propagate them, and hopefully we can incorporate in the reforestation project. No? The idea is to do the rewilding thing, so we reforest the area, so we we bring the birds back to the forest, and the birds bring more different species, and that's make the forest back again, no? Kind of the rewilding system. So last year, for example, we reforest about 8,000 tree species with 20 different trees with 20 different species, including bear food. And the goal this year is to also reforest more area with over 120 different species. No? So here are some photos from some of the reforestation projects in the highland part of our study site. But also what we want to do is fostering the human-wildlife coexistence. So for that, we recently implemented Andean Bear Interpretation Center, where we have different spaces where we show about the ecology of the Andean bear, how they're helping in the regeneration of the forest, and how we can contribute in their conservation. So the idea is this space is open for the general public, for local, national, international, is bilingual. And the idea is they came to the Bear Center, but also they go through the trails and just see the cloud forest in general. And also they can interact with the scientists as we are working here at Waikecha Biological Station. No? But we also, what we do is we work with our, we do festivities. This was the Ukukuraimi, or the festivity of the bear, as a way to start our planting season. So we dress as the locals. We try to be part of them so they can trust us. And one important component, of course, is the Andean bear. No? So we have our own mascots that we take to any festival events that we do. And yeah, so we are diverse teams. With this project, we just, it's early, like we started in 2021. So far, we're having very good results, but I think the way how we encroaching with the local community is that forest, well, bear is forest is water, and it's the way how we are working with the local communities. No, so that's we done so far. We haven't have results yet, as we are still in the process of our research. Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you, Ruth Mary. While we transition to Matt, I would invite a question or two for Ruth, if anyone has one. Okay. Thank you.
You guys see my screen okay?
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Hi, everybody. Nice to meet you today. I appreciate the two talks before. We're going to go from an international to maybe more a local focus, and I apologize for that. But I'm here today to talk to you about mountain biodiversity conservation in the face of climate change and development. I got to figure out how to get everything to work. I'm sorry. There we go. So the Southern Appalachians is one of the most biological diverse places in North America. The complex geology, including several rounds of mountain building, and the fact that it's one of the oldest continuously exposed land masses on Earth, has allowed our region to develop a large amount of biodiversity. Pleistocene glaciation also played a significant role in generating biodiversity. So through the processes of isolation by distance, over the last 2.5 million years, we have seen 8 or more cycles of glaciation. With each of those cycles, plant communities that are normally found in the northern latitudes are pushed south into the Southern Appalachians. When the glaciers recede, those community types then either migrate back north into the more northern latitudes, or they will move upwards into the mountains, chasing those environmental conditions that they prefer. This process has occurred so many times that we have generated a relatively large amount of diversity that tend to find themselves on the very peaks of our mountaintops down here in the Southern Appalachians. While most of the United States is already beginning to experience the temperature increases that are associated with anthropogenically derived climate change. You'll notice that the southern Appalachians, their continental position, and the fact that they're buffered from many of the large bodies of water like the Atlantic or the Gulf of Mexico, have been able to maintain the same temperatures that they've experienced over the last 100 years or so. This is the reason that the southern Appalachians is a reservoir for biodiversity, both in the past, present, and hopefully into the future. The United States has one of the oldest and most sophisticated systems of protected areas. But when scientists start looking around, they identify a distinct mismatch between the areas that we have protected and those biodiversity conservation priorities. Using a variety of different techniques, these researchers have identified the Southern Appalachians as one of the highest priorities for biodiversity conservation in North America. Today, I'd really like to introduce you to the Amphibolite Mountains. You can see on this map of Watauga and Ashe counties, both Boone, North Carolina down here in the south, and Jefferson, West Jefferson up to the northeast. And the Amphibolite mountain range runs in between those two communities. Many of you from this region are probably familiar with some of the peaks within the Amphibolites. Starting down here in Boone, we see Rich Mountain running north, terminating around Tater Hill. I am the steward for the plant preserve that's located on Tater Hill. We also have Snake Mountain, Elk Knob, the Peak, Three Top Game Lands, as well as Patty Mountain, Mount Jefferson, and Phoenix Mountain, all peaks within the Amphibolite range. If you haven't visited these in person, you may recognize the names because most of the rooms in the Student Union are named after the Amphibolite peaks, suggesting that these are part of our culture and part of our university. The Amphibolites are a jewel of biodiversity in the Southern Appalachians. The unique geology of the area, the Amphibolite rock, that as it degrades and turns into soil, produces a rich circumneutral pH soil that allows plant species that are not found in surrounding regions to thrive in our particular area. The climate change that has happened over the last several million years has influenced the biodiversity in this region, and the very, very peaks of these mountains contain some of the most rare biological communities in our region. The distinct change in elevation, as well as the exceptionally steep slopes associated with the Amphibolites, has stymied the ability for things to be developed within that particular area. Sometimes this region is called the Lost Province for good reason, because there isn't a lot going on in this particular area. This has allowed some of those biological communities that are so special to the Southern Appalachians and in the Amphibolite to be maintained in a pristine setting where they haven't been affected too greatly by human interaction. We also find that the aspect of the mountains helps generate even more diversity, with Rich Mountain moving in a essentially north-south orientation and mountains like Three Top moving in an east-west orientation, developing environmental heterogeneity that allows for either further niche partitioning amongst our species to generate even more biodiversity within this given region. Within the Amphibolites, we have a series of some of the rarest plant communities found in North Carolina. One of those is known as the high elevation rock outcrop. This is the rarest plant community in the state, as far as I know. It contains a whole series of threatened and endangered species, including the Blue Ridge goldenrod, the Roan Mountain bluet, as well as things like spreading avens. We also have grassy bulbs that have a series of lilies, delphiniums, and orchid species, as well as mountain bogs that act to protect our water systems, as well as harbor unique biodiversity like this fringed gentian, grass of Parnassus, and even cranberries that we normally don't see this far south. These island habitats are biodiversity hotspots on the landscape. The unique combination of abiotic factors has led to high endemism, or location or species that are found here and really nowhere else. The It is my fear that these communities will be disproportionately impacted by climate change in the near future, and they are threatened by disease, invasive species, development, and recreation. As Appalachian State grows and the community that we live within grows, there is some conflict arising between conservation and preservation of the amphibolites. Some people look at the amphibolites and see that as an economic engine to drive tourism and draw in people to come visit this biodiversity and interact with it. Others, like myself, have great fears that human interaction with these biological communities will destroy them or degrade them to the fact that we lose some of the really unique species that are found there. Modern environmentalism is not an either-or situation. We know that there will be a combination of preservation and conservation to allow us to move forward. But it is my hope that Appalachian will engage in kind of bridging the gap when it comes to preserving these habitats and utilizing them to generate economic incentives within our particular region. I feel like we as a university have the ability to bring some of our strengths to the table in order to help make decisions to sustainably develop the amphibolites into the future. On the research aspects, people like myself can document the biodiversity within the area. We can map the boundaries of some of these unique biological communities, making sure that we know where they begin and end and where we can and can't interact with them. We can also go in and assess the health of these community types, and we can use a lot of predictive tools to help us identify what the impact of the anthropogenically derived climate change, as well as land use on these unique plant communities, is going to be. Finally, I think we have a big role to play in education, particularly of the public. I'm asking questions along the lines of how can we improve the quality of nature education? Can we utilize things like virtual reality, QR codes, and the ever-present smartphone to kind of reach a broader community of people and engage them in nature education as a whole? I'm interested in promoting interest and awareness in the amphibolites so that people understand the value of those unique communities and why they need to be protected. I also think that we are in a unique situation where we can engage groups of people that have not commonly interacted with the natural environment and begin to educate them and get them to acknowledge the value of those things and maybe bring them into kind of some of the decision making and future projects that we might kind of envision for the amphibolites in our given region. I think that's all I really have to say today. I'd welcome any questions. I know that was pretty quick, but I was trying to hit my 10-minute mark, so I think I actually got that one.
You did. Thanks so much, Matt. I was leaving some buffer between presentations for some questions, and we're a bit of a quiet crowd today, or have been so far. So we're actually running a little under time now. And I will go ahead and open up for discussion and conversation. We will, in about 13 minutes at the top of the hour, we'll kind of have a formal close and pause, stop the recording. And if folks want to stay on after that, they're welcome to. I think some joined after we shared that information. But do you all have questions for one another, or do audience members have questions for our speakers today? Thank you all.
I could start with a question to break the ice. First, thank you, all three of you, for really fantastic presentations. It's great to learn about these different perspectives and thinking about the unifying theme of what is special about these mountain environments. Made me think about just kind of a feasibility question in terms of sampling that you might take, or double dipping. It's almost as you've all made the really great case that these are unique in the world environments that you're focused on. And it's kind of like whenever we send up somebody into space, everyone's got their tiny little experiment on board to take advantage of that really rate limiting factor, which is going to space. And it's not that dissimilar from, you know, going to these far reaching or very unique places. Is there room, or is it kind of difficult feasibility wise? For example, Baker, you gathering those samples with microplastic intentions with them made me think, are there other ways that it would be useful or possible to invite people in the community that have other similar questions, but might be different from your research, to kind of double dip with the types of samples that you're collecting or data that you gather when you go to these places? And is that something you've looked into or would want to? And I guess that's for all of you.
Yeah, no, great question. I can take a first stab at that. And that one thing I had thought about mentioning, which I didn't, but this is a great opportunity, is that while I was at the South Call at 26,000 feet in 2019, I spent a couple hours collecting soil samples as part for our biology team. And then they have been analyzed at the University of Colorado, and we have a paper from that it's just in the final stages of review, but that's an example. I mean, yeah, it's an extra effort, extra time, and that's probably one reason why the mounts for those wind sensors didn't make it in the loads that when we went up the next day, is because I should have been triple, quadruple checking those loads, but I was out, in fact, taking these samples. And so there are trade-offs, but absolutely right. And then we're starting a project, well, we're going to start working with Ruth actually in Waiketcha to set up a few rain gauges around there with precipitation. So that's in the works, and trying to do more overlap. But just one other thing I would say is that there's an incredible opportunity for people from other disciplines to use the weather station data that we have collected too. And that's a high priority. I mean, some of it's already on the National Geographic site. We've got loosely quality controlled from our Everest sites, but the other ones we're still building tools. And so that can make the data more widely available. So that's certainly one thing. But if people have other ideas, what sort of data we might be able to collect on some of these expeditions, then absolutely, I would love to brainstorm more about that. I don't know, Ruth, Matt, if you have thoughts on this too.
Thank you, Christina, for the question. And I agree with Baker. No, yes, to get to these places is very expensive. Has a lot of logistics. No, as my study area as well is like the mountains, very rugged. So we have to do these expeditions. We have to make all the logistics, the team. And yeah, as we are also collecting different data, like also like for example, the footage of the camera traps are going to be available here from some years. As that's the reason why we are using this Wildlife Insight platform. So that's going to be a aspect of the biodiversity on the area. No, we are kind of focused now on the Andean bear, but surely somebody else is going to come with different questions. And also we are sampling water across the streams to do also environmental DNA. For now, our focus see the present access of Andean bears, but it's water samples, so surely we can do most studies like in microinvertebrate diversity and other things. No, so yeah. So within the study, we kind of collect other information. And we are keen to also collaborate with other researchers. No, as Baker mentioned, for example, for the rainfall. No, I pretty much most of the time I spend time here. So what's the best way to collaborate with other researchers? We are on the field, so we can also collect other data, other information.
Yeah, I am very specifically looking for collaborators. I think you guys could tell from my talk that I'm a geneticist. Well, you can't probably tell I'm a geneticist from the talk, but you can tell I like plants. There are a diverse other group of things out there that need to be quantified and looked at it the same way. And so I'm very excited about the new biodiversity center that we're planning to build here on campus. And I feel like we could focus some of the energies in that facility towards those amphibolites. I really do think that some of the technology we have at our fingertips now really can drive some of this forward. One of the other faculty members in the biology department this week has organized a BioBlitz competition between Appalachian and Greensboro, UNCG. And we're blowing them away, which is a really good thing. But it just opens up the ideas to the power of those mobile phones. Individuals could be out roaming around the amphibolites, snapping pictures of all the different things that they might find. We can accumulate that data in a way that lets us have a better understanding of what species are there. That could be a community-based project where students from our classes are the ones that are going out and collecting the real data that we desperately need to make good decisions about how to protect some of those sites. I also think that, you know, as a scientist or a geneticist, I don't have the skill set to do some of the educational outreach that maybe needs to occur. And I want to promote that idea that we need to raise awareness about the uniqueness of the amphibolites so that, you know, people within the community of Boone know what it is, know where it is, and understand kind of why we are so protective of it. A lot of times people look at me and they're just kind of like, yeah, there's nothing out there. And I'm like, yes, exactly. There's nothing out there. And that's the way we want to keep it. Everybody has different ideas about how we should develop and move forward. And I think that using data to help guide some of those decisions would be a meaningful way that Appalachian can play a role in making those decisions.
Matt, this is Chris Thaxton. Matt, I love the idea of taking the camera, you know, your phone, take the kids for a hike. And it's such a great educational experience for them and me. That would be really cool. I had a quick question for Baker. I'm really curious about the nature of modeling, both at short and long timescales. Of course, the data you guys are acquiring and processing will serve to inform those models. I'm curious, you know, how are the models doing in terms of predicting, you know, total precipitation and you know, out through the future? Do you have a finger on your pulse to that?
Yeah, no, great question, Chris. And again, that's one of the things I could have touched on is just there's a huge opportunity to take the observations that we're collecting and use them, especially in coupled models with glacial-hydrological models for really projecting future water resource availability. Most of what our team has been working on has been more of the surface energy balance modeling for glacier surfaces, and that's a lot of the discussion that's playing out right now in this paper. And so of course the weather station data have been critical for driving those sorts of mass balance models. In terms of the atmospheric numerical, you know, weather prediction models, they, you know, what we found, and we've published some on this too, what we found is that with the, you know, large scale, you know, wind and temperature that's available in the different levels of the models on it that you're very familiar with, Chris, they generally work pretty well. And I mean, that's maybe been a bit of a surprise for us. I mean, the correlation has been very high with just the, you know, that mean wind and kind of the gust that we're seeing at some of these stations, which is good for predictability too in the longer run. But precipitation is a whole nother challenge. And so we've, you know, had these two very high quality stations lower down on the mountain, and you know, gosh, the WRF and even, you know, the GFS and the European, I mean, it's a pretty sheltered, I mean, the base camp station in particular is just, it's got you know, 5 to 10,000 foot high terrain all the way around it, so it's very sheltered, and so the models miss the shadowing that occurs there, and just overdo the precipitation. But you know, we've been able to make a signal in a sense out of the noise, and there's an opportunity to do a lot more for us with this.
Thank you.
Hey, Baker, I had a quick question for you. Do you know what satellite imagery and DEMs, I guess maybe the French, are using to estimate snow depth?
Well, so they use the Pleiades satellite, which is a French-Israeli, is my understanding, to create a pretty good DEM based on, I think, 2019 data, and then compared it with the Washburn, you know, high-res stereo pair air photos from that 1984 map of Mount Everest. And so that's how they did the DEM differencing. So that looks those are the data sources. I can send you this, Jeff.
Okay. Yeah, I'd be curious. Yeah. Take a look at it. Thanks.
I had a quick question for Rosemary or Ruth Mary. I did a quick Google search here on Indian bear habitat, and obviously it's all along distributed all along the Andean chain, or most of it anyway. But it also looks to be very fragmented. Can you make a comment, or do you, what is going on in terms of looking at corridors and conservation corridors for this species in these areas that are possibly isolated simply by elevation, but I would assume that also land use change along the Andeans is actually causing a lot of that as well.
Yeah, thank you for the question, Steve. Yes, one of the most threatened for the Andean bear is the habitat destruction. There is a lot of patches, as I mentioned. The one bear, for example, one adult bear needs about 70 to 100 kilometers square in order to live, to reproduce as normally should be. However, we have a lot of deforestation and burning, and that's what's making the habitat reduce all the time. But also is the human wildlife conflict on the area. As the habitat of the bear is being disrupted, bears tend to go out and then encroach on the cattle, also in the agriculture, in the crops, as the corn. So they are usually killed by the locals, by the campesinos, by the indigenous, no? Because of course they are killing their animals and they are eating like the corn. So in Peru, we have, for example, our association, between different organizations, NGO, and the government. That we are setting some goals in order to promote the conservation of the Andean bear, and also the creation of corridors between different protected areas. So like in this side of Peru, where I am studying, for example, between the Manu-Tambopata corridor, and others. So that's the idea, to make corridors in order to stabilize the population of Andean bear. But also an important thing we are doing is the reforestation, trying to recuperate these degraded areas. So something we realize, for example, is the grasslands are very, very important habitat also for the Andean bears. As these areas, you can find one of the main sources for them is like the bromeliads and also the wild blueberries. It's an important area, and I think it's also one of the reasons why the bears are going very high. They're getting in contact with the local communities.
Yeah. Well, we see the same thing with black bears in the southern Appalachians here, in the sense of utilization, seasonal utilization of the grassy balls and areas like that. It's much like Matt was talking about there. We see that all the time in terms of food utilization. So in terms of forest restoration, is that focusing on areas that have been analyzed as potential or necessary corridors to maintain connectivity of the bear habitat?
Yes, so for now, yes, we're working across the buffer zone of protected areas where is the human-wildlife conflict occurring. But the goal in the future is that try to also restore these areas that can be part of the corridors, no, for within different areas.
Thanks.
Well, we can continue our discussion. As Grace had alluded to, our speakers have been generous enough to say they can stick around a little bit. I think for the purposes of our recording, maybe it's time for us to formally end the webinar and to just thank everybody for your time and these great talks. Thanks for people watching this back, and you can always reach out to RIEEE